Good day everyone and welcome to my Magicka Sorcerer PvP guide for the Deadlands DLC. This patch nothing much has changed for MagSorc in particular. But there are some changes that are in the builds for this patch because of some sets that I can now grind very easily, and also because some sets from last patch such as Hrothgar and Dark Conversions got nerfed. This means that some of the builds will be the same as in previous patches, and some of them will be new, for example the non-petsorc, of which I uploaded the gameplay video the past week. And to make things easy to navigate, I have put timestamps in the description that you can use, and you can also see briefly the builds right here on the screen as well, so you can jump to whichever part you like, depending on which specific content you do and what build you are looking for. But with that out of the way, just gotta say that the builds are also available on the website, so if you want to follow along and see all the details in case I missed something, you can also find it there. And in the description you can also find a gameplay guide and a commentary where I explain things from basic to more advanced rotations and ways to play in PvP and how to play Sorcerer. This here will just go about specifically the builds for this patch. So, first some general information about those builds, concerning the potions, poisons, food, etc. I want to start with that so I don't have to repeat this every single time I put a new build, because often this information will be the same. For example, the food will most of the time be with sugar skulls, which you can see here. The best dry food, I don't think I need to give any explanation with that. Just the non-petsorc will be using rollsorc, smoked bear haunch, because the maximum Magicka is not as valuable there, but I'll talk more about that when I get to that build. For the potions, most of the time I'll be using the Alliance spell draught, basically spell power potions. With detection potions, whenever, I don't think I have any left anymore, but detection potions when I'm fighting a Nightblade, of course, because that denies their cloak. And then very occasionally I'll swap to a tripod whenever I'm under heavy pressure. For example, on the Ironblood build I can do that every now and then, because the stamina sustain isn't that high there, and having this extra chug there as I'm under heavy pressure can be useful to get some extra roll dodges and a break free, stuff like that. Then this is when I'm not using crit surge. On some of the builds I will be using crit surge, and on those builds I will be using Essence of Immovability, which gives me CC immunity, Major Prophecy and Magicka. So I still get my Major Sorcery of course from crit surge, and instead of the Major Sorcery from the potion here I just get Immovability, which can be really nice for Sorcerer, especially because you can utilize it to reliably pressure somebody, but also to cast Dark Conversion without getting interrupted. Then the poisons that I will be using in every build, I think it is Escapist's Poison here on the back bar with Restoration Staff. It is another source of immovability. As I mentioned before, it's something really nice to have for any class, but also for Sorcerer for sure. And the root it also gives, like a secondary effect, is not half bad either, because it does break the offense that somebody is putting on you, since, well, suddenly they are standing still, they have to do a roll dodge to get out or cast a snare removal. So this is really one of the best poisons. You can craft it with additional effects, however the unstoppable effect that it gives will be of a reduced duration then, and I don't advise doing that because it's super good to have this CC immunity active as high of an uptime as you can get. Then a vampire is also something I need to talk about. Usually on Sorcerer I do not go vampire. I do have it active here because there's one build, the non-shield build, where I do recommend using it. But on my usual builds with shields and such, I don't go vampire because the sustain loss is quite big on MagSorc. It can really eat through your sustain easily. And also, if you're relying on shields a lot to take damage, you don't take as much damage on your health, and then you don't get as much use from the Undeath passive, and that's really the important thing about Vampire here. This mostly counts when you're a high elf like me. If you're a Breton, it is a bit easier to sustain Vampire, and then, you know, you could definitely argue that it is worth going with that Undeath passive, because the sustain loss isn't as bad, since Breton has that cost reduction and the regeneration. But ultimately, no matter the race you are, this is a bit of a decision you have to make for yourself, whether you go Vampire or not. Do you want a damage reduction, or do you want the sustain loss, or don't you want that? Like, this is something you have to make up your mind for individually. I can't really tell you what to go with here, with some rare exceptions and some hints about it, like I just said. Then the champion points, they will be well, almost equal for every build as well. The green CP, just to go over it really quickly, are Rationer, Steed's Blessing, Warmount and Gifted Rider, that's whatever. The blue CP are Ironclad, Duelist Rebuff, Deadly Aim and Master at Arms. And then the red CP are Sustained by Suffering, Bastion in case you're running shields, so let me slot that real quick. So Bastion if you are running with shields, then Pain's Refuge and Arcane Alacrity. This is also when you are running with shields. For non-shield builds I don't run Arcane Alacrity and Bastion of course. In that case I will be running Celerity over here in combination with Relentlessness instead of those two. But I do always keep the Pain's Refuge and Sustained by Suffering. Some other peripheral information for all the builds is the race. As I mentioned, High Elf and Brenton are good, Dark Elf is also good, but to be honest you can run almost any race. Of course there is a difference if you choose to go with something like an Orc compared to a High Elf, but the thing is you can run Magicka Sorcerer on anything. Yes, it's a loss, but you can make up for it. It will be okay. I wouldn't really bother being too worried about it if you just want to try out the class without really maining it. If you do want to main it, of course, and if you want to min-max, High Elf and Breton are your best choices. Then there is Dark Elf. Maybe at further down the line you could consider Khajiit as well, but you know, basically High Elf and Breton are the ways to go. Lastly, the Mundus. Usually I'll run the H-Knock as well. Sometimes I run the Mage on builds. I will go over that as I go over the builds as well. But with this general information out there, I'm going to start presenting the builds themselves. And the first one is a build I have presented for a couple of patches now, so feel free to skip over it, but I do want to stress that it's a really good build to start out with as well, because it's very flexible. It really has this core sorc playstyle that you can adjust to your own needs as well. You can experiment around with, which is something that is really important, of course, if you're starting out with the classes, that you can pick and choose and try different things and see what you feel best with. And the build here, like I spec it a bit into a rollsorc, which means that I roll dodge a lot, and that's a spec that I really like to play. So you'll also see it in my gameplay videos quite often, among which those that are linked in the description as well. But the gear here is 5 Crafty Alfiq, a staple maximum Magicka stack for Sorcerer, 2 Trainee, 3 Ancient Grace, Death Deals Feet as a mythic, and 1 Magma Incarnate. The idea here is simply to stack as much Maximum Magicka and Magicka Regeneration as I can. However, I have also made some sacrifices in those things to get some more stamina sustain. And with that I can roll dodge a lot, and I can also cast Dark Conversion a lot, which is very useful to have in open world in 1vx, because it makes me very agile and it makes my sustain basically endless. For example, through the traits on the gear I have full well fitted, lots of roll dodges, but if you're not into that kind of gameplay, here's already the first change you can make. You can go with full impenetrable just fine, and you have like, I think it's 14% crit damage reduction if you go full impen. So, you know, obviously that's a nice defensive buff to have, and it makes your shields a bit stronger that way as well. Another thing that I do to get some more stam sustain is here an infused Tri-Regen glyph. It gives me a bunch of Magicka and stamina sustain. The other two are just arcane Magicka recovery, but you can also make this one arcane for bigger shields if you want. You can even switch to a spell damage enchant if you don't care about Magicka recovery as much. These are the things you have to change for yourself, to be honest. I'm just telling you how I run this myself and how I like to run this, and also exactly what I've been running during those gameplay videos. So that's for the traits on the jewelry and the enchants. The enchants on the armor are full maximum Magicka, and then the weapon traits and enchants are defending on the back bar with the escape distance poison, as I mentioned before, and sharpened on the front bar with a shock glyph here to get some uptime on minor vulnerability and the little procs of damage from that shock glyph. Charged can be run here as well, but for that you do have to run Crushing Shock as a spammable to get some use out of it, but for open world I definitely prefer to run Sharpened with Elemental Weapon, and you can run Sharpened with Crushing Shock too, of course, it will also get the job done. But before I go over the skills, I do want to talk a little bit more about mythics and monster sets. First of all, you know, Death Deals Feet is not something that everybody can easily farm, I guess. There are other mythics you can use. Citis, for example, will work really well. Then you just playstyle as a Crafty Alfiq, and then you use a Crafty Alfiq ring. And then otherwise there are also, oh yeah, there's also Talk of Thermal Constancy, which is a sustain boost, but I do prefer Death Deals Feet over those aforementioned 2 mythics. There's also monster sets that you can run in case you don't have access to mythics at all. One first good candidate is Mighty Tudun. I do prefer running Sith instead of that, but Mighty Tudun is also a really good thing to consider. It gives you extra tankiness, and then of course you switch out Boundless Storm for bound armor as well, which gives you some more maximum Magicka on the back bar. Need to have, because that will make your shields bigger. The other monster set worth talking about is Engine Guardian. Much like Talk of Tonal Constancy, this is a bit of a sustain boost. Also nice to have. You know, it's not the best. I still think that mythics are better, but in case you don't have those, it's definitely worth trying this too. That little engine would also be taking a lot of damage from the enemy, lots of ultimates even. People will cast meteors and soul assaults at it, so it's quite a bit of damage reduction that way as well. But with that out of the way, I do want to swap to the skills now. Very classic Sorc setup, of course. Streak as standard mobility, Fragment as burst, Elemental Weapon as spammable, Haunting Curse as a burst ability, Endless Fury as a burst ability too. It's a burst ability before it's a finisher, to be honest, because you want to apply before people drop below 20% health and make sure you get a nice burst with Curse and possibly a Fragment hitting at the same time. Power Overload, which vastly increases my pressure, but you can also slot something like Aetherlock over here in case you're not comfortable working with this, because I do see questions about it every now and then, but really it just replaces your light attacks. That's all it does really, and you play with it just like before. Boundless Storm as your armor buff. This can sometimes be swapped out for bound armor, even bound Aegis. Even if you don't have Mighty Tudun, it could be worth trying that, because Aegis is also going to give you a little bit of spell resistance on the back bar, spell and physical resistance, and more maximum Magicka. Then your 3 shields, your shield stacking setup. First Hardened, then Dampened, and Healing Ward. You can use Rapid Regen instead of Healing Ward as well. And then Dark Conversion as your sustain, and the heal sometimes can be useful as well, but more about that later. And Temporal Guard as a back bar ultimate. It can also be Rest ult, but these days I do prefer Temporal Guard, because Rest ult often, even when the heal is up, I can be so squishy that I can still get through it, kill through it when there is a bunch of enemies on top of me, and the Temporal Guard will be a better way to escape out of a tricky situation. Except when it's lagging, of course, then you do the dance of my people, but outside of that, I don't play in lag anyway. Temporal Guard is the better option for me when fighting Zergs. But that's it for that first build. So yeah, Aetherlock Mundus. Stage 3 is not something I would run with here, but I'm just keeping it here to show for another build. And now to the second build. The second build is a build with Ironblood. Need to quickly equip that, of course. So this build centers heavily around the tankiness that Ironblood will give you. I do have a commentary that you will see linked, I think, at the top of the screen about now, that will showcase how exactly that build plays like in combat as well. But to go over the gear, there's 5 Ironblood on the back bar with Defending, Restoration Staff, again the Escapist Poison. On the front bar I have Spinners. Spinners is a good offensive set, but it can be any offensive set you want. You can use Drogokin here, you can use Skalurion here, whatever like picks your fancy as offensive set you can run here. Spinners is in any case something you can't go wrong with either. The jewelry is full arcane Magicka recovery. You won't see me running infused anymore now, because now my maximum Magicka stack isn't large enough to warrant sacrificing the arcane trait to an infused trait for more regeneration, and then 2 pieces of trainee as well. The traits are a mix of impenetrable and well fitted here. This is a bit of up to you whether you want the ability to roll this more or whether you just want to be even tankier. The Magma Incarnate 1-piece shoulder, best in slot 1 piece, and Gaze of Citus as mythic. Now I do prefer this over Death Dealer's Feet, even though you can run both, like I mean any of these just fine with this build too, but the tankiness that Citus gives in combination with the tankies from Ironblood, and then possibly also the tankiness of Vampire if you choose to go with that, is absolutely insane, and it allows you to get a really different playstyle than the previous build, where you rely much more on just tanking out the damage and staying in the place where you are, and using that tankiness to continue pressuring an enemy. You still have an offensive set, so it's not like you don't have any damage either, and with that you get kills. And then, you know, you can risk much more trying to kill an enemy, and then you go back and you defend yourself again. If your Ironblood proc is up, you have a lot of damage reduction this way. And then for the skills, there are some changes as well. First of all, instead of Boundless, I like to run Aegis here, simply because it allows me to get a somewhat decent maximum Magicka stack.
I know it looks a bit low at 41k, but the thing is, I do like to run the H-Knock Mundus with this as well. Instead, the Magemans, the Magemans instead of the H-Knock Mundus, which gives me about 44k-ish maximum Magicka, good to have. Shields are decently large, not that high, not as high as the previous build, but the crazy tankings from Ironblood, Cities, etc. definitely makes up for that. The sustain might seem to drop a little low, but keep in mind that these stats do not count in sustain by suffering either, so overall you'll still be around 1750 magic recovery, which is a fine amount to sustain, especially for a build this tanky. You can even afford a heavy attack with your restoration stuff every now and then. But yeah, for the rest of the skills, I run rapid regeneration here because again my shields are a bit smaller and I would like to have a bit more that healing over time effect from rapid regeneration, because it allows me to get like a shield up and that heal up and then switch to the front bar, and then I have a lot of extra defense and healing ticking while I'm pressuring an enemy, which really goes hand in hand with the playstyle that Ironblood promotes. Then the shields as normal, hard ward, dampened magic, dark conversion and life giver. Now I do prefer the rest ult because now this is a tanky build and I can really cast this thing and become semi-immortal for quite a bit of time while my Ironblood is up, of course. This allows me to really take a lot of pressure and pressure somebody through it, and that's often how I get a kill with this build as well. Front bar is largely the same. Your ultimate on the front bar again can be Overload if you prefer that huge damage boost, or H-Knock. The third open world CP build for this patch will be the no shield build, the one you have seen past week in the gameplay video. This gameplay video will also be linked on the top of the screen again now if you want to check it out, and it will be in the description of this guide as well. But this no shield build, yeah, it is in the name. This build is going to focus on heals. I shall maybe start with the skills instead of the sets actually, just to explain how that works, but the main healing is actually just rapid regeneration, and that is a lot of healing in its own right, but that is paired with crit surge and then optionally the Twilight, but definitely also dark conversion, and then the rest of the ult in case, you know, things get tough, there's a lot of people focusing me. But the main healing really is rapid regeneration. You will see in those clips as well, I try to have as high of an uptime on that while I'm taking damage. That's often already enough in combination with critical surge. One of the clips doesn't even have Twilight slotted. I do like to slot Twilight because sometimes when you take a large amount of burst and you happen to have one of your bursts, your heals down, let's say like your crit surge is not up, you know, and you're busy surviving, it can be useful to have that big burst heal. As your spell damage gets higher with the stats that I use, this Clever Alchemist in there, this burst heal will also increase in potency until you get about a 14k, something like that, 14-15k tooltip on it with Major Sorcery and Clever Alchemist. So that does become quite a big heal. Dark Conversion is also a little bit of a burst heal. It helps to cast that pretty regularly, especially while CC immune, because this build will be using immovability potions and poisons, and while that is active you're free to cast Dark Conversion as much as you want because you can't get interrupted. And sometimes even just a Dark Conversion into a Twilight heal right after can bring my health from like 20% to up quite easily. So it's really good to have these burst heals available to counter, well, bursts taken to your health. But rapid regeneration and critical surge theoretically should be enough to survive within its own right. Sometimes it's a bit tricky, but one of the clips also, like, you know, just uses these two heals with Dark Conversion, no Twilight, and it is already pretty good on healing, just like that, because of the damage reduction and the healing power of these things. Bounder Storm is necessary because when you're in melee range, it's going to proc critical surge when this thing crits. And then on the front bar, I have Streak, Crystal Fragments. Now I use Crushing Shock. Crushing Shock is mandatory. I will talk about that more in just a little bit. Curse is your burst, of course, the Twilight heal again, and Power Overload. I do like to use Power Overload here because of the extra damage. This build already has high damage to begin with, but having this on top really creates a crazy amount of pressure that you can use. Now, if you do choose to drop the Twilight, you cancel other skills here, of course. For example, Endless Fury, you know, to further increase your damage. This is a pretty good idea. You can either slot a dot like Soul Trap over here, which is going to give... Wait, where is it? Ah, here it is. Soul Trap over here, which is going to deal some pressure on the enemy with this set I will talk about in just a bit. And it will also give quite a bit of maximum Magicka back whenever somebody dies, which is good to have. Well, certainly not bad. On the back bar, in case I drop Twilight, I like to fill it up with the Revealing Flare skill, because that skill is going to give major protection, plus 10% Magicka regeneration on the back bar, and MagSorc can eat through sustain sometimes, so you know, these two 10% bonuses are good to have as a passive. But you can go like crazy with what kind of stuff you want to slot here. I mean, you know, you can slot mines even. I've tried that too for a little bit. It's a pity it's only a 15-second duration on this anymore, but it can be fun to play around with mines instead of the Twilight heal sometimes. It's, you know, up to your own experimentation if you choose to run this build. You might see me do that too from time to time. Now that I'm at the stats anyway, you can see this build is basically going to stack spell damage instead of maximum Magicka now, because now my healing is going to come from the spell damage stat, and it's not going to be like shields that only scale off maximum Magicka. The health will be around 28-29k. Sometimes I do like to go and switch 10 points from Magicka into health just to sit around the 30k health mark, but that is if I wouldn't be running Death Dealer's Feet. Speaking of that, I will go over that right now. So the mythic here is Death Dealer's Feet. Ideally, I would be running Markin's Ring of Majesty here, but the problem is that it is bugged for now. You can't get it until like the 15th of November. Then they will fix that, and then I will be running that mythic instead of Death Dealer's Feet. But both of them are good anyway. You know, maybe I might even keep Death Dealer's Feet, because there's a really nice thing about it. You can see it in the gameplay too. It's just how it looks when you have both Death Dealer's Feet procced, Magma Incarnate procced, and Clever Alchemist procced. All those three things give like a nice visual effect around your arms and shoulders, and that together with Bounderstorm, it looks really cool to play with. So maybe I'll even just keep Death Dealer's Feet just for the looks of it. But that aside, so Markin or this mythic. And then the other two sets are Draugr on the front bar and Clever Alchemist on the back bar with a classic Destro Resto setup, Magma Incarnate as a monster set, and One Piece Trainee. So starting off with the Clever Alchemist, this is a staple of course. It's nice to have that buff. So always take your portion on the back bar, which is going to be the essence of immovability here, because I'm running Crit Surge. The monster set Magma Incarnate is going to proc from Critical Surge, and I think, yeah, Rapid Regeneration as well. Twilight will not proc it, but Dark Conversion will also proc it, and it's basically going to create a high uptime on some pretty neat buffs. Minor Courage and Minor Resolve is good to have, and that one piece of course is also really good to have for Magicka Sorcerer. You know, all that stamina recovery from this and the Orsorka Smoke Bear Haunch that I'm using on this build creates a really high base amount of stam regen, together with Sustained by Suffering. This is going to go up even more, and this allows me to have a lot of raw dodges without really specking into it even, and this allows me to be really agile in combat, have a lot of damage reduction. And this is also sometimes how I survive when I'm not running that burst here from the Twilight, is simply by keeping up my heals over time and then doing a bit of damage reduction by using a raw dodge maybe once or twice. And that will give me some, you know, bit of immunity against ranged projectiles, that then allows the healing to get my health back up, and then I can get back into the fight. But that aside, the nice stamina regeneration is always a nice thing to have for Sorcerer. So definitely of good use here too for mobility and damage reduction. Now about the front bar set, the Draugr Inferno Staff. I want an offensive set for the front bar, and this is one of the best things to go with, because the charged trait on it is going to proc a lot of status effects from your Crushing Shock, because you have that Destruction Staff passive, where is it? Increases chance to apply status effect by 100%, plus the 480% from the charged trait, which got buffed this match, plus the CP here as well. There's a certain champion point that gives you a lot of extra chance as well, if I can happen to find it, that is. Here it is, another 30% per stage, so 60% increased chance. But all that, make sure that you're going to proc the stats effects a lot, and the stats effects are nice because they're a bit of a debuff. For example, Minor Vulnerability is going to have the enemy have a 5% increased damage taken debuff. You're also going to have Minor Maim on the enemy from the Chilled stats effect, and Burning is going to deal a dot. But also the Concussion and the Chill stats effects in themselves are going to deal a bit of damage upon proccing. And then as a glyph I have the Poison Glyph here, which when this stats effect procs from the poison damage, is also going to deal a dot damage portion, similar to the fire, to the flame status effect, burning. Both of these are going to be 2 little dots on top of the little bit of extra damage from the concussion and concussion and chilled status effects. Point being, all those little damages instances, together with the 3 damage instances from Crushing Shock, are all going to get the effect from Dorgekin, which is 600 extra damage to that enemy you cast it on. To all those little things get 600 extra damage. So, you know, if you cast a big skill like Crystal Fragment, 600 extra damage, it's not that much. But all those little things added on top of each other do add quite a bit of pressure on the enemy. Especially again if you have multiple things, you know, hitting them at the same time. You have a curse exploding, a crystal fragment, a crushing shock, all the stats effects going around, maybe a tick from Bounderstorm. All that stuff is going to get a 600 extra damage, and this makes this set quite strong for an increased damage output. Definitely worth a try. But it is not necessary to use this. You can also go with Kalurian again, or Spinners, as I have talked about before with the Ironblood build. Any offensive set that you deem fitting for this will do the trick here. I think that's it for this build I have to mention. Still Escapist Poison on the bar, of course. I mentioned rollsorc and the potion. Yeah, okay, so that's it for the CP builds. Now I'm gonna go in NoCP and present the NoCP build. Well, I think there's 2 builds actually for this patch. Right, so here I'm in NoCP. I'm in NoCP IC right now, but those builds will work in NoCP 0.2, of course. The first build to present here is a bit of a changed version of the main CP build that I mentioned at the start, one with Crafty Elfique, Trainee, etc. So this uses the Witch Sugar Skulls again, of course, and with that you get a decent amount of 48, almost 49k maximum Magicka. It's necessary to have a large amount of maximum Magicka if you want to work with shields or a lot of damage reduction. I'll talk more about that later. Because in NoCP you don't have the Bastion CP and you have a little bit less bonus of maximum Magicka from your CP. Like that's something you're missing out on as well. This makes your shields significantly smaller, so it is important you invest into defense in NoCP, otherwise you're going to be squishy. Even with this build that pushes maximum Magicka quite a bit and uses cities, I sometimes still feel squishy, which is why I have a second build I will present in a bit as well. But the sets, as I mentioned, they are similar to the build at the start, so there's 5 Crafty Elfique, 2 Trainee and 3 Ancient Grace. The enchants are full maximum Magicka. Magicka regeneration on the jewelry. You can do 1 or 2 tri-regen glyphs as well. Arcane trait, sharpened front bar, defending back bar with Escapist's Poison, and then 1 piece Magma Incarnate and the cities as well. But in any case, full impenetrable, maybe like 1 or 2 well fitted if you want to go with that. Depends a bit on how much you want to rely on the roll dodge. I do advise going with cities here instead of Death Deals Feet because of what I mentioned earlier is the damage reduction or the maximum Magicka that you need to have, and I feel like cities is kind of a must-have in NoCP for sure. But next to this small change in Mythic, the other thing to change about this build is in the skills. So I use Bound Armor instead of, Bound Aegis instead of Bounderstorm here, simply because I don't really care that much about the movement speed from Bounderstorm. I don't really want to sprint too much either because, you know, the stab sustain isn't as much on point either. So I do like to just have Bound Aegis instead because it's going to give me that maximum Magicka I need. It's going to give me a little bit of physical and spell resistance still, so I'm not missing out on that much from dropping Bounderstorm. And I won't have to cast Bounderstorm anymore, which is a boost in Magicka sustain, something that is really useful for NoCP too because you're missing out on sustain by suffering, of course. Then next to that the shields are the same, so Hardened Ward and Dampened Magic. Rapid Regeneration, same reason, because Bastion is not here anymore. And Bastion, which increases the value of Healing Ward as well, is not going to increase the value of Rapid Regeneration, meaning that Rapid Regeneration when compared to CP is not getting nerfed when you switch to NoCP. Dark Conversion, and then as ultimate I have Life Giver. Like before, you can run either this or Undo based on your own insights. Front bar is the same as always. I've already gone over this, so I won't do it again. The second NoCP build is a bit of a change to this build. It simply is going to use a damage reduction set instead of the 3-piece Ancient Grace and the 2-piece Trainee. The damage reduction set I'm using here is the Swift set, which is going to give you Magicka, good to have, armor, good to have, and a 10% damage reduction. Not to the same likes as Ironblood, of course, but in NoCP you can't use Ironblood because there's no proc sets allowed there, which means that we have to go with something else. Ethereal Ascension can work here as well, but I do prefer Swift because of a little bit of Magicka bonus. You know, this gives you like 44 and something K max from Magicka. Not terrible, your shields will still be somewhat big, but I really don't want to go much lower than that, to be honest. It makes me uncomfortable. But in any case, the Swift damage reduction together with the Gaze of Cities Mythic gives you that damage reduction that you are looking for NoCP. This is the build I would mostly be running in NoCP, to be honest, instead of that changed version of the other build. But I do want to mention it as well because the other build is still a really good starting point. You know, as before, it allows for a lot of versatility in what traits, how much Magicka you stack, etc. So I definitely want to mention both here. But so this build here as well, the skills will be Bound Aegis, just like before. But you can also run Bound Armor instead of it or on top of it. It depends a bit on what you want. If you run Bound Armor on top of it, you'll have to drop a skill for it. For example, Endless Fury, you could do that, and then you really start to stack your resistances. If you do that, your buffed up resistances will be some of the highest you can find around for MagSorc, with about 32k spell resistance on the back bar here. And then the rest of the skills is basically the same as well as in the previous NoCP build, and the changes that you can make I've mentioned before as well. The last build in this guide is going to be the Dueling build, which fittingly is recorded in Alaka Desert, of course, as it is known that the only proper place to duel or even talk about duel is the Alaka Desert, and everything that happens in Alaka Desert stays in Alaka Desert. So this build is going to be about as much of an obnoxious Sorc dueling build as I can make it, so it's going to be a pet build, of course. I'm going to use the Familiar, I'm going to use the Twilight, I'm going to use the H-Knock as well. The sets are going to be, well, intended to buff that petsorc playstyle as well. So I'm using the Ritualist set on the front bar, which is going to buff all that damage. I'm also going to use Maw of the Infernal, giving just yet another pet, always good to have. And then I'm going to combine that with Death Dealer's Feet, 2 willpower on the jewelry together with that, and 2 pieces of trainee. On the back bar I'm running the Master's Eye Staff. This can be perfected or non-perfected. Of course, perfected is going to be a little bit better, but either of those will do if you can't be bothered to farm the Dragonstar Arena even more. In any case, Master's Eye Staff on the back bar is going to do a lot, because that skill is going to give Major Maim, Minor Maim, and this 600 weapon damage from the set, plus 450 weapon damage from the enchant, plus a root. So you can imagine that all that together is a strong tool to have in a duel, which is why I'm running this on the back bar. The traits on the front bar are sharpened again, the traits on the jewelry are arcane, and on the gear you ideally have full impenetrable. I mean, it never hurts to have 1 or 2 well fitted, but as much impenetrable as you can. I forgot to mention it a couple of times, but you can also run reinforced on the armor anytime instead of impenetrable, because it's going to give a lot of damage reduction relatively for a trait as well. Because with that base armor on a heavy armor chest, your reinforced is going to give about, I think it's 1% or 2%, something between those, damage reduction more. It's really min-maxing at this point, but I do have to mention it because I often forget to do it because I can't really be bothered. But ideally, you should go reinforced on the heavy chest. But with that being said, so I've gone over the sets here, and I'll just hover over stuff so you can see it. But then for the skills, you do want to make sure, of course, to use both of the pets on both bars. Oh, and one more thing, the sustain may seem a little bit low, however this is without sustained suffering, of course, and it is a dueling build. You don't need as much sustain in that. Plus I also have elemental drain, so you know, it's going to come all together and still create an okay amount of sustain. Even if you should like it every now and then, you can easily do a heavy attack because it's a duel, and often you do have the time to do it, especially because with the pet build, because you can just safely LOS behind your pets and behind your H-Knock and whatnot. But for the rest of the skills, as you can see, I'm not running Streak on this build because the Familiar here is going to stun. There's not much use for Streak anyway. You can't out-kite the enemy forever, to be honest, especially if they are like somewhat fast. they will easily catch up with you in a duel, because you can't just outright kite an enemy and run behind the rock or something. If if that would be an acceptable practice in dueling, I would certainly use streak, but it is, you have to kind of stay near your target, and for that, a streak as a mobility skill is not very useful. And as a stun skill, it's not that useful here either. It's a better stun than familiar, but the familiar already has a stun, and I'd rather save up the skill slot for another skill. So, basic setup with elemental weapon and fragment as spammable. Well, elemental weapon is spammable and the fragment as burst. Temporal Guard on the front bar, and then the back bar is your main ultimate, Greater Storm H-Knock. Temporal Guard is just there for the minor protection. And then here is also your burst ability, your Daedric Prey. It's not even leveled yet, because that's how much I love dueling. You can just see it right here. But in any case, the buff that this gives is also further going to increase the damage of your pets. So if somebody chooses to stand in your H-Knock and they have the 2 other pets and the Maul and the Infernal on them, he's going to take a lot of pressure. Clench, of course, so that Master's Ice Staff and Elemental Drain, as I've mentioned before, necessary for the damage, but also really nice for the sustain. Anyway, end of these builds. So, and also end of the guide with that. As I've mentioned before, everything will be on the website, detailed, all the detail, like all the specific food and skills and sets and whatnot. If you want to watch it at your own pace, you can find it there too. It's at the top of the screen and will also be in the description of this video. There's also the Discord, as I've mentioned before, you can join that. Any questions you ask there, I will get to as quickly as possible, or you just drop them in the comment section here in the YouTube guide. And then lastly, there's also Patreon. If you want to go check out, I would greatly appreciate it. It's what helps me keep this up, with all these builds every patch and whatnot. But if you want more personalized guidance in the sense of like gameplay reviews, one-on-one sessions, personalized builds, stuff like that, that's also your go-to for it. But in any case, if you like this content and you would check it out, I would greatly appreciate it. In any case, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time in a gameplay video or in a build video. Have a good one.